This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Bette Davis Signature Blend Coffee from Breakfast at Dominique's, Hollywood's most prestigious coffee company. You can order the Bette Davis coffee and all of the celebrity signature blends at hollywoodblends.com. Sit back with a cup of this wonderful coffee and enjoy this special conversation with Kathryn Sermak, who discusses her book about her relationship with the Invincible Bette Davis.
Hello everyone, I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today we are focusing on the greatest star of them all, Bette Davis. There is only one person who spent almost all of her time with Miss Davis during the last decade of her life, first as her personal assistant, and then as her closest friend and confidant. She's the author of the must-read book for every Bette Davis fan, Miss D and Me, Life with the Invincible Bette Davis. I am thrilled and delighted to welcome Kathryn Sermak. Kathryn, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Harvey. Thank you for inviting us. It is really a great pleasure, truly.
Bette Davis died in 1989. You didn't publish your book until 2017. Why did you wait so long?
It took me that long. It took 30 years. Because one, I always said I wasn't going to do it. Two, Misty always told me and made me make a promise that I would. And something like that, I think in the I wasn't ready. And I think it really happened in the back of my mind. I always knew I had to keep that promise. But, you know, it's something that the book was written with our letters, our tapes. And I think it was, I'm trying to remember, maybe it was the year 2000 when I was moving and I came across all the tapes that she sent me from Los Angeles when I lived in Paris. And then I sent, tapes back to her, even though we spoke about every other day. So by the time I received the tapes, I didn't need to listen to them because everything was already on the tapes. But it was during that time that I started listening to the tapes. And then I transcribed every tape, like 400 and some odd pages. And then it just little by little started to evolve. I had so much wealth of an information, and Misty always told me the story, the only reason to write the book, there were so many books on her, is it's a story about two women and how the youth can learn so much from the elderly, and the elderly can also learn from the youth. That basically was our story. Along that it's Bette Davis and it's showing a side of her. But all those other books, I always knew it's not a book of we did this at this day and this day and this day and you went to this premiere or you did that. She always said when you make a movie, you do a script, you have to have the bones of the story. So, it's, as Misty would often say, better late than never, but at least it needed, what can I say? It needed to be right. I'm only given one shot at this. And I always wanted a book that's going to, stand up for a long time.
Well, it certainly does. In case anybody watching is wondering who Miss D is, I think it should be obvious that is the term that Miss Davis suggested that Kathryn use when addressing her. And so we talk about Miss D. You mentioned already that Miss D asked you to promise her that you would write the story of your friendship. Why do you think she wanted the world to know about this very special relationship?
It's a side of her that the world didn't see. Deliberately, she always taught me, when you are a celebrity and as well known internationally as she is, you need to be grounded. In other words, you don't listen to your press. You always keep people, not necessarily in the industry. You keep those people who are your friends. They could be your dentist, although yes, she did have friends as writers. But they were not always the celebrity people. She didn't want yes people around. When you go that big public, the public wants something. If they could, they want all of your energy. And she taught me, no, you have, in other words, when I worked for her, there's the professional side, working for Bette Davis. In other words, you're in a hotel. When I leave that hotel room, I'm going downstairs. I'm representing her. I'm not going down in jeans. When you get on an airplane, I have a job to do. Just like she taught me in the business, she knew who Bette Davis was and who the public wanted. And she always gave that to the public. Behind closed doors, that's the little Yankee woman who would polish her own silverware. Many times she was like my mother, my grandmother, my best friend. And as I say in my book, when I first met her, I didn't really know who she was.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. You were 22 years old in 1979 when a 71-year-old Bette Davis hires you as her personal assistant. Did you have any idea what you were getting yourself into?
No, I was clueless. All I know is she was my ticket to go back to Europe. And I wanted to go back to Europe. I had finished school. I'd studied over in Spain. I was supposed to go to graduate school. I was studying to become a doctor of psychology. And I decided to stay in Europe for 1 year. And I fell in love with France. I needed a job. And I went around various agencies in LA, and I got the job with the Shah sister of Iran, Princess Pahlavi. And so they were in the States for 6 months before they had to go to Acapulco. And that's really what led me to Miss Davis, because once they left, and they said, we want to help you get another job. And I said, no, that's all right. I was headed back to school. Also, after working for, a princess, I needed to be a sponge, go down to the desert and just take a few weeks to kind of think, to process everything I went through with that job. And it was out of the blue that an agency heard of me. Remember, this is back then, we're back in 1979. Hollywood was, it's word of mouth town. Everybody knows, hears of something. And out of the blue, I got a call saying there's an actress wanting to go. She needed somebody right away, and she was going to England. And then I remember they said it was for Bette Davis. I didn't know who Bette Davis was. And that evening, Helen Ann put on, I was sleeping in the library guest room, and there was Misty's autobiography. And I stayed up all night. It was The Lonely Life, and I read it. And I just remember, call it a hunch, but I had a premonition, and I even wrote it down. I knew I had the job. Okay. And I wrote it down only so that I could not deny it. I wish I had those premonitions often. And then the rest is history.
Miss Davis said that she hired you on a hunch because she said you had poise and discretion. She was obviously very astute to pick that up in one interview. But what did you think when she told you that?
So when I was in Spain in 1976, and that was during the revolution they were having, I was always taught by a wise man, when you travel, leave your rules behind and try to adapt to the country that you're living in. I tried to adapt to the Spanish culture the same way I did when I was in France. And now you come back to the US and you work for the Shah sister. First of all, when you work for a princess, you do not talk to there's rituals. And by having that experience in France and Spain, I'm quite sure I was easy to adapt. What Miss Davis probably picked up on was, I was pretty much at that time very independent, but also secluded. If you're not speaking English for 2 years, and then you go into working for Princess Pahlavi, that's kind of normal. She has 17 servants, but, they were speaking Farsi, all, different languages. So I was pretty much very used to being alone.
What I find amazing is that you describe yourself in your book as a rebel, a black sheep, strong and confident and not easy to control. How did someone with that kind of personality ever survive working for someone as exacting as Bette Davis?
I think when you're young, I was hungry to learn. I was you're hungry. What drove me? I wanted to see the world. Miss D was my ticket to see that world. So if I'm going to learn something, learn from the best. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I had 3 months to kill, 4 months to kill before college. And those 4 months with Misty in England, I tell you, I learned more from her and seeing this whole new world unravel before me than I ever did in college. And I knew instantly, I just knew instantly, no matter what, if she offered me the job, absolutely, I was going to take it.
You had a psychology degree. Did that help you in managing Misty's demanding personality?
I think psychology always can help anybody. Because, psychology, it's the study of behaviors, it's the study of people. Misty would say, hey, know somebody's sign. I didn't, as much as the world sees her demanding, I didn't find her, I found her as a perfectionist, but she only, this is right, that is wrong. If you make 1,000 mistakes, just don't make the same one twice. She was incredibly complimentary, more so than I'd ever seen. She was probably one of the most honest person I ever know. When she's wrong, she's the first to admit it. She always believed work really hard and then play hard. Do you know what? Once we finished a movie, she would say, hey, go away for a month. Paid vacation. You've earned it. I never asked for a raise. She would call Harold. She deserves a raise. She was incredibly supportive of women and always telling me, always filled with compliments when you do a good job and go beyond, push the limit. No, so I didn't find her demanding that way. Extremely, I know in the business, a lot of, and it's certainly after she passed, then I start hearing this other side. You have to remember, I'm 24/7 with Miss Davis. You're basically, you're living, you're eating, you're young, you're hungry, you want to know this. I was blessed by when she would have dinner parties, having people who, at that time, I never thought anything about it, but they're writers, they're directors, I was just, I was thrilled to be learning new things.
Did you ever sit down with her and watch any of her movies? Or did she ever watch her movies?
No. The only time we did that was at the very end when she had radiation. Miss Davis always loved to be busy. She loved her work. She loved her work. She loved her family. But so when you go through, the world didn't know that the cancer came back and she had radiation. So I think it was, I think it was a period of about 2 months. Every week you have to go in for radiation. And that makes you extremely, extremely tired. She had a friend, Tom Bodley, who was over at Samuel Goldwyn. He was an editor. And it's like, okay, since we all know she's not going to be doing interviews and she loves to keep busy, she decided, and she talked to Harold, let's create a documentary. So we took Misty, we went through, got all her 35 or 8 millimeter, way back then from 1930, her home movies, and we started putting it together. And it's at that time that Tom said, if you're going to do a documentary, you're going to need to watch her films. Because you have to understand, we were always working. We were always on the go.
What were your job duties as her personal assistant?
Every day's different. It's not like going to an office. Every day is different. Whatever whatever needs to be done. I think in the beginning, she knew. I had never been on a film set. I never knew how to run homes. So let me tell you, Misty she had a big job there to train me. There's a certain way to do things. Jack Warner trained her, Warner Brothers trained her. So professionally, she taught me how to mark the script, how to run lines, how to, when you're on a set, eventually, as time goes on, how do you talk to the press? There's an education every foot of the way, but it's not like a job interview saying, okay, this is what you do the schedule, you pick up the telephone this way. Miss D's hands-on. She's very independent. She's not one of these divas who say, the telephone rings, Miss Davis will pick it up. When she taught me, how you behave in a hotel. I was a bit too chatty in the beginning with the waiters, all of this she needed to teach. She needed to teach me, as I say in the book, when you get on a film set, she basically said, I'm going to introduce you to the director, the first assistant, the producer. That's all you need to know, and you stay by me. None of this where all the assistants go and they chat and with the hairdressers and the makeup. No, she did not stand for any kind of gossip. So, any questions? That was one thing Missy always said. You have any questions? Ask me. I will always be honest. Anything you don't know, which was pretty much everything I didn't know. So I would always ask her. That's the best way to learn, is to ask.
So you said in the book that working for her, it wasn't just a job, it was an education, and you described it like going to a finishing school. How so?
But it was because she taught me in the very beginning when I met her, and you shake hands. Okay, her hand was so powerful, which I stated. It left I had a ring on my finger, and I was like, oh my gosh. Miss D didn't realize how young I was. She thought the agency lied to her. I did not know the agency lied to her. Had Miss D asked me, I would have outright told her my age. So she thought I was much older, like in my 30s. She didn't know that I was 21 or 22.
Kathryn, you used the word invincible to describe Miss D. You were there with her through the worst times of her life. Let's start first with her health problems. She had breast cancer and then suffered a stroke at 75, and then she broke her hip. Tell us what it was like to be at her side while she was recovering from these catastrophic illnesses.
It was devastating because you have to remember, you don't know what's going to happen. So when she had the mastectomy, that was scary because you never knew, is it malignant or not? But then, 9 days later, it's like, fine. She's supposed to go back to do Hotel, the series, if you recall with Aaron Smelling. But no way was she going to do that. Then she sees the gurney coming in for the x-ray. That's when she had the stroke. And that probably, the hip, not that devastating. It's a setback. But no, what was really devastating is the stroke. You are fighting for your life, and you don't know if the person's going to make it or not. Every day. You don't, nobody knows. The doctors can't tell you. So that was the worst.
You observed firsthand her indomitable will to live and to regain her independence, and you were there by her side through every step of it. It must have had a lasting impact on you.
Well, it did, but you know what? Anybody who's had a stroke, let me tell you, she has all the awards. There are many times she did not want to live. So that she is, I say, invincible. She used to say she's like a cat with 9 lives, with everything that she has been through. But she also said, God never gives you more than you can handle. But that, at that time, I think the stroke was the most devastating. She had the stroke doesn't mean, you have a stroke and you're talking. You can't talk. You can't move the left side. And everybody at that time would, they wanted to not talk about it. And then when it comes to her career, it's like, well, she should never be seen again. Hide behind it. Go out like Greta Garbo. That is not Miss Davis. No, she faces things. And it was going to be a huge fight back because you're fighting. She gave me great credit, but it's like she's fighting for her life. I'm fighting for mine too. And that's when you learn two people, when you have two people, you have more people fighting for a cause. It's not easy. but you do overcome it. And she did in time. It does take time.
In 1987, Bette Davis's daughter, B.D. Hyman, published a book that described her mother in extremely harsh and uncomplimentary ways. This devastated Miss D. It outraged the Hollywood community and Bette Davis fans across the world, and you had to be there to help her deal with this public humiliation. Can you tell us a bit about that ordeal?
I just know it was devastating. It was worse than the stroke.
Wow.
You think if everything that you go through, because it's a huge betrayal, and this is a daughter. Anybody who knows Misty, she loved this girl more than anything in the world. And the one thing I could never understand or understood why, because if you're writing this book, you spoke to your mother, at least during my time, they spoke every week. Bede wrote all these letters. I have the letters. I could have printed them in my book. My book is not about sensationalism or scandal, but I always wondered, why wait till you have the stroke? Why? Because, they told us, and she was in the room, they took Bede to the side. They took Harold and I to the side and said Miss Davis only had 2 weeks to live. So when Bede's book came out, to me, it's like, you wanted to write a book. Why did you not write the book when your mother was strong? When you were talking to her all the time, when she was buying you a lake, buying you the farm, so yeah, that was devastating.
Well, I have to say, you spent a 4th of July weekend with Miss D and her daughter, BD, and the family. You got to see the relationship between the two of them. And I have to say that when I read that part of your book where you described that weekend, you assessed the family dynamic very objectively. You were able to see the mother-daughter relationship from both points of view. I was really very impressed, given your obvious loyalty to Miss D.
But Miss D always told me, even though they never spoke, a mother loves her children. There's no question, Miss D, you don't stop loving your child. It was an utter betrayal. She never spoke to Bede again. But she also suffered for what she knew what the book would do when the book came out. So not only did the book hurt Misty, it hurt Michael. I went, as I said in the book, I pleaded with Bede, please don't write this book at this moment. Harold said the same thing. Let the book come out after she's gone. We are fighting for her life, but it's not a rocket science to see why the book, and when the book came out, as I said, we were in England. Where's Bede? Miss Davis always, every trip, she always called Bede. I'm here in the hotel. And when I went to England, all of a sudden, where's Bede? And the farm, you don't even tell your mother you sold the farm and you leave the country. Yeah. I don't know. That was the hardest fight back. I thought the stroke, but then to go through with what she had to go through with the book, no, you never get over that.
Now, that same year, 1987, Miss D wrote her last book called This and That, which you helped her with. Not many people know that it was actually your idea that she write the book. Why did she want to write a book at that stage of her life?
Okay, let me tell you. First of all, that's not her last book. The last book Misty wrote was the updated version of The Lonely Life, and we finished it in San Sebastian. That it came out in paperback, but that is Miss Davis's own words, and that's the very last. This and That happened because we were, she had the stroke. Having the stroke, her brain was intact. It was physically the left side that took time to all your muscles, to get your muscles back. And so I don't know, I had a dream in the middle of the night, and when I woke up in the morning, I said, what about that book? When I first started talking to her, she had mentioned, there was a book. So she spoke to Harold. The idea was, I didn't think the book would really go into print. The idea was we needed to be busy. Miss Davis is always busy. We always have projects. If it's not this, it's that. If it's not a film, you're doing this. She's always doing something. She's not one to sit idle.
So the book was really a way of keeping her occupied.
Yeah, for me it was. For me. But then once Miss Davis starts getting into it, Miss Davis is incredibly creative, and she knows what she wants. So I'm just the assistant. For me, I have a dream. Hey, to me, it's like, okay, let's get busy. To Miss Davis, she knows what a book does. She's already written a book. She knows what it entails. She loves books. And so she chooses, she met with Michael Herskowitz because he was the original one years ago. And that's how it got started. It's like, this is how she wants it. This is how she sees it. Then there was the big fight with the publishers because Beatty's book came out. They wanted a response. And Miss Davis said, no, I will never give a response, ever. And she would never talk about it in an interview either, other than to say it was the biggest insult.
A lot of people wondered why Miss D kept working and making movies even after she had been so ill. She made Murder with Mirrors in 1985, As Summers Die in 1986, The Whales of August in 1987, and Wicked Stepmother in 1989. She really lived for her work, didn't she?
She loved her work. She always said she would never say that she made Wicked Stepmother because we walked off that film set. Once she saw the dailies, that was it. Because when she looked at that film, and they had changed the script and changed everything, there was no way she was going to finish it, ever. Mm-mm.
There was a lot of press during the making of The Whales of August claiming that there was tension between Miss Davis and Lillian Gish. Was there any truth to those rumors?
I wasn't on the set of Whales of August. All I know is I always did the prep before because at that time I was living in France, but I always come back for 2 to 3 months to do. So I worked with Mike Kaplan. I did, she came over to Deauville when they launched Wells of August. She did all the press for that. A lot of times people like to put, peg one thing against the other. I see it many times in Hollywood. So, it's hard for me to say. I just know on my end, I never saw that. I remember there was just one evening, and maybe it was something here in Hollywood that they wanted the two of them to go to. And she wasn't well. She wasn't feeling well. But let me tell you, when you're not feeling well, you cannot say that to the press, especially if you've gone through what Miss Davis has gone through, because all of a sudden then it's like, oh, you'll never work again. You'll never work again. If they knew she was having radiation or, after the stroke, she'll never work again. But she left her work.
What about the relationship with Helen Hayes during the making of Murder with Mirrors? Those same rumors came out again.
Rumors are rumors, but I can tell you from my only point of view, I was on the set. Murder with Mirrors is the first film Miss D made after the stroke. Do you know what kind of nerves it takes to walk on knowing the world is expecting the old Bette Davis, that nobody has seen, Miss D with the stroke. She's wondering, can I remember my lines? Am I going to remember how to act? If she appeared to be cold, let me tell you, it's because she was scared on that film. She was only scared, am I going to make it? And you make it one day, the second day. That takes a lot of guts and nerves when everybody, I think people don't realize that. What they realize is, oh, Bette Davis. They're not used to realizing, do you know what it takes to have a stroke? No, because nobody ever in Hollywood had a stroke. She was the first person to come out after having a stroke and say, here I am, look at me. And then people were like, oh, oh dear, look, her, the lip droops. But over time, they get used to it. It took Mystique time to get used to it. She did not look at herself for a year in the mirror. So that's all I can say. I did not see it on the set. Helen Hayes was already on the set when the very first day Misty and I came on the set. Miss Davis noticed Helen didn't have an assistant. Nobody was there taking care of her. It was freezing cold. We were outside, and Misty said, go take care of her. Go see what she wants. Go help her. And which I did. Miss Davis, during that film, she is not chatty, not in the beginning, because in the beginning, she's getting used to who she now is. She had the stroke. She's incredibly thin. She knows people are going, making comments because they're expecting the old Bette Davis, because nobody has seen Miss Davis since the stroke. So yes, there's a lot of that little gossip, and she would just go, and so would I. We would go into her dressing room or into her trailer. She was not sitting around talking with the cast and crew. The time Miss Davis became social that I recall on the film is when John Mills invited everybody to lunch. And at that time, we were probably halfway through the film. When you're not working, when Misty is not working, she's more social. But as I go, she's getting used to, this is her first film back on the set, and she had great insecurity. If you Google Bette Davis's first interview, 1985, after the stroke, look at her eyes. Her eyes go down to the ground. Then start watching the second interview, the third interview. Now she gets more confident. And if you watch the films after that, by the time she's in San Sebastian, that woman was bigger than Queen Elizabeth, if you know what I mean. If you start watching, she eventually, I noticed it even in her voice. She became very strong. When she was through with what she said, people thought it was very rude. She would hang up. She wasn't being rude. She just took it. Okay, that's it. That's all I had to say. Boom.
Well, let me ask you, many people who worked with Bette Davis have said that she was the consummate professional, always well prepared, extremely knowledgeable about the movie making business, and something of a control freak on the set, especially if she didn't have confidence in the director. I always got the feeling that if she'd been a man, they would have said she was a perfectionist. But because she was a woman, they were quick to criticize. Was that your impression too?
I had nothing to compare it to. You have to remember, this is my first time being on a film set. So when I see what Miss Davis does, I just take it, that's normal. She is a perfectionist. She wants things done right. You fight for what you believe in. Well, I have to say, I agree with all of that. So, when you talk to other people who, you're talking to people who know the film business, they've been other actors, directors, Miss Davis herself. But for me personally, I don't know any different other than she was my mentor. This is right. This is wrong. If it's wrong and the director thinks it's right, then, hey, you're fair. Let's decide. But she was very strong and opinionated. But if you disagreed, then that's fine. Then disagree, but tell her why you're disagreeing.
Right.
Okay, that's it. I mean, to me, that's normal. But for I believe what she told me, if back then when women did it, you were called the B word. But if you were men, that means you're very, intelligent, smart, good businessman. Yeah.
In 1987, you accompanied Bette Davis to the Kennedy Center Honors. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
It was wonderful. When they send out the ballot, they send out a ballot asking, who do you think, should get the Kennedy Center? And she put me. I was horrified. I said, you can't do that. And she goes, I think I deserve it. Absolutely. And she did. And she did put me. Because, I was brought up differently. You do not do this. I mean, so, and then she did. She got the award, let alone Misty at that time. She's a Democrat. Who gives it? President Reagan. But she was very proud. She was very proud to get that award. Yes.
It was a beautiful night.
She had gotten so many awards, and to have people, people that she adored, just speak about her.
Do you have a favorite Bette Davis movie?
I think the one I always liked the most is All About Eve.
Did you watch the 2017 Ryan Murphy miniseries Feud about Bette Davis and Joan Crawford?
I did.
What did you think of it?
I wasn't there during that time. All I always said is, that's not the Misty I know. That's not the Misty I've ever seen professionally on a set. Don't forget, it's not a documentary. If you want to know the truth about Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, go read this and that. Miss Davis tells the whole truth. She gives a whole chapter of this and that to, about baby Jane. And what I know, Miss Davis always said there were two actors or actresses she would only ever talk about and say she would never work with again. And that's Marion Hopkins and Faye Dunaway. But Joan, she always found Joan extremely professional. So that's all, I wasn't around during that time. So
what did you think of Susan Sarandon's portrayal of Miss D?
As I said, that's not the Bette Davis I know. I know Miss Davis professionally, and I know her personally. That's not the woman I know. And what I didn't understand with having I was always curious why they went to Joan Crawford's estate and got all this film footage when you have the Bette Davis estate. We have with all our archives, but nobody ever came, to us, to me, to Michael about it. So I can only say, right, you wanted the dramatization. You didn't want, everything factual. But, hey, it's a movie. When that came out, I always said, Misty, you wanted my book. How are we going to generate press? And when that series came out, that's what, the publishers, my book went into a bidding war.
Obviously, Bette Davis was in Hollywood many, many years. She must have had some very good friends in the business. Who were the big stars that she was friendly with?
The big star, I would say some of her, the closest, the very, you have different levels of friendships, but R.J. Wagner, Roddy McDowell, and Bob, but especially, she would have R.J. over. When we threw a party, it would be R.J., Natalie was there, Edith Head, Vincent Price. But I remember also, she had a name for R.J. She would say, "You're just beautiful, inside and out." And then R.J. came out with a book not too recently called I Loved Her in the Movies, where he spoke about Misty and a few other famous actresses that he worked with. But she always said, he's just beautiful inside and out, which he is. And he's a great friend to me since Misty's passing.
Well, please pass on to Robert Wagner that I loved his book, Pieces of My Heart. I loved his book. I loved her in the movies, and I would love to interview him.
It would be a pleasure.
Thank you. Kathryn, the part of your book dealing with Miss D's last few days is really heartbreaking. You wrote that Miss D knew that she wasn't going to make it and that she promised to send you a sign after she passed to let you know that she was watching over you. If people want to know what that sign was, they're going to have to read your book. But I do want to ask you, do you ever feel her presence with you?
I always do. She and I often talked about whoever goes first, Well, now I've had, aside from Misty, I've had my parents, both of them. I think just like, it's almost like you sense something. Sometimes people will say, hey, they'll have somebody come to them in a dream. People often ask, well, don't you miss her? It's like, well, no, because I just always feel some sense of protection. You know, that's just me personally. You know, I always ask whether it's the book or whether the documentary we're working on, or if it's a film, if this is supposed to happen, hey, Misty, either make it happen. God, you want it to happen, send me the people. You know, and that's kind of what happened with the book. It's like, and if you want this to happen, then help me find the agent, help me find, and I'll just be the vehicle. And a lot of times that's what I think, you know, that was why my purpose, if you want to say part of it. She left me to be part of the estate. I didn't need to be part of the estate. I have my job, I have my memories, but she told me what she represented. So as part of the estate, hey, China, you come to us, can we use Bette Davis smoking cigarettes? No, because now we know smoking cigarettes causes cancer.
I have to tell you, I think your book would make an excellent movie, not only because of what the two of you went through together, but because it's one of the few stories about the friendship between an elderly woman and a young woman.
Well, thank you. I always believed in it. We came very close to having it made until COVID struck, you know, hit, and then everything in development went by the wayside. So who knows, maybe after COVID, it will pick up again. If so, you know, I always thought it would be a great motor trip, 2 women on a motor trip. You know, it would be, you know, small independent film, but there's great stories there.
Oh, yeah. What would you say was the most important lesson in life that you learned from Miss D, if you had to pick just one?
To thy own self be true.
And she sure was.
Yeah, she always, you know, I think when you're true to yourself, that's when, you know, and you learn your own gut instincts, it gives you the courage to move forward. I didn't know this in the beginning, you know. Miss D, she always went with her gut instinct. She always trusted it instantly. I came from a different background. I was raised a Catholic, you know, this is right, this is wrong. Never, it's not to go with your gut instinct, it's go with your head, you know. And then it took a long time to really learn what she knew. And her parents encouraged her, you know, at the age of 3, the age of 5. And now we learn it much older in life.
Do you think that Bette Davis really got how beloved and appreciated she was as an artist?
Oh, I think so. I think so. I don't think we ever talked about it, but how do you go to these film festivals and there's thousands and thousands of people, you know, and screaming your name, and she always cared about her fans, and she always stopped and did everything for the fans first. She always told me, you know, without your fans, you don't have anything. She always took care of her fans. She would go through the oodles of fan letter and out of the blue, pick up the telephone and call somebody, and they never believed it was Bette Davis on the other end.
Wow.
She took her fans very seriously. Absolutely. And she has a huge fan base, you know, here it is 30 years later on Facebook, which is amazing.
You were one of the first people to receive the Personal Assistant Career Award in 2003. The impression I got from reading your book is that if you're the personal assistant for a famous person, you basically are at their beck and call 24/7 and you have no life. What drew you to that kind of work?
But you do have a life. I did have a life. You know, it's different. I think 24/7, there were, you know, when I was young, and when you go on a film set or working for Miss D, because I look at a lot of different personal assistants today. Miss Davis was not a diva. You worked hard, but she made sure you were always compensated. You were always given time off. Hey, Miss Davis is the one who said, hey, go to France. She paid for the ticket to France. How many employers pay for your ticket to France, you know, and pay for your time off? Or, okay, you want to go here. You're being paid anyway. But no, she knows how hard it is and how many bonuses. When I started working for her, I had a college debt that she knew, you know, the loans, and every every Christmas, $10,000 back in 1979. That's a truckload of money. But she wanted me to start life without being in debt. So there's when, yes, there are times you work hard, but 24/7, no, you do sleep. She is, all right, you work hard, you play hard. But she was very considerate.
So let me ask you this. You've been the personal assistant to royalty, to movie stars, to statesman and journalist Pierre Salinger, astronaut Buzz Aldrin, Motown founder Berry Gordy Jr., and American designer Patrick Kelly. How do they compare with Bette Davis as employers?
Well, they're all different. I mean, certainly with Miss D, they were all mentors in one way or another. But I did not live 24/7 with the others. There's a difference. But when I would say they're great teachers. Mr. Gordy, he was extremely honest and a great teacher. Buzz Aldrin, extremely honest. All these people have one thing: they are hardworking people. They are all perfectionists. Interesting, but I don't see that. They go beyond the limit. That's why they're number one in their profession. Well, there's a reason why you're number one, because you care so much. Even Buzz now, 91 years old, and I believe so is Mr. Gordy. He's 91 too. These people are go-getters. They're still busy. They're still, reaching for the Mars or the moon or, whatever project they're working on. They're incredible. You don't have that with everybody. And I always say I feel very blessed to have them as my teachers.
I was going to ask you, do you ever pinch yourself and say, I can't believe I've had the life I've had, that I've gotten to know on an intimate level these amazing legends?
I feel very, very fortunate. There's no question about it. But I'm always asking, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? It's because you don't look back. I think Miss D always said, never look back, you just go forward. So you can't really look back. And there are times I think, gosh, I haven't done anything as opposed to all these people. But then maybe, I think writing the book, people think it's not easy to, go, especially that book. Although I'm very proud of it, but there are times it was very painful to write about because you're reliving things. And sometimes those things are painful, but you have to be honest. Just like I think I learned from Miss D and from, as you were talking about the others, for it to uphold time, you have to be honest with yourself, honest with the situation, whether it's good or bad. That's what I think all these people have in common.
In 1997, you and Bette Davis's son, Michael Merrill, co-founded the Bette Davis Foundation, which gives bursaries to gifted young actors. Can you tell us a bit about the foundation?
Basically, what the foundation is we give money to students. They have to be in the arts. And Mike and I, after Miss D passed, we always wanted to create a foundation. I mean, it's a way of giving back. And when neither of us knew how to go about it, and I will always, thank Warner Brothers, because at first, going to all these events with Miss D, I thought, okay, you will hold a huge event, like we have all these award shows. And it was Marissa O'Neill who said, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Create a foundation, choose the university, you can give it, the awards to an actor, actress, whatever. The first was to Meryl Streep. And then send a letter to the studios asking for donations. That way, you keep the money in the foundation. If you try to do these big events, then guess what? You are paying for the actors, the actors, the hotel. And in the end, it's a wash. There's no money for the foundation. So basically the foundation, we started off with 1 scholarship. We're now up to 5 scholarships. And it's in the name of Bette Davis. And it's to help, people who want to pursue their craft.
This interview is being released on April the 5th, 2021, which would have been Bette Davis's 113th birthday. This is a very special day for all of her fans. How do you honor her memory on her birthday?
Well, Miss Davis would first say, you add the numbers. After 50, you add the numbers together. So if you do that, she's actually 5 years old. Yes, she would love that. So doing this interview, do you know what? I think doing this interview, she would be thrilled. I'm thrilled that you're releasing it because we always try to do something, for her fans on her birthday. And I think it was a few years ago. That's when, we mentioned the book is coming out. We announced it on her birthday. And I think Monday's going to always be very special. Yeah, she... it's hard to say because if you were inside so much of Miss D, I look over here, here's her bookshelf, here's her desk, here's the chair, downstairs, the famous Shays Lounge, her famous dining table, and she taught me it's the little things in life, be very grateful, be very appreciative.
Well, Kathryn, talk about being appreciative. It has been an absolute joy to talk about our beloved Bette Davis with you. I feel like I've gotten to know her through you, and that's such a gift for any fan. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you ever so much. And I thank, your audience for listening. Truly appreciate it.
I think it was so generous and kind of you to agree to do this interview.
And I can't thank you enough for having me, and I shall say Miss D also, because it's a joy. And I think it's a great tribute for her fans and for allowing us to be on your wonderful podcast.
Well, anyone who wants to know what Bette Davis's life was really like in her last decade needs to read this book, Miss D and Me, Life with the Invincible Bette Davis. There is definitely much to admire and respect in Miss Davis's invincibility, that's for sure. Our guest has been author Kathryn Sermak. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.